Thank you all so much for joining us. I'm going to get started slowly. We have a lot of people coming in right now, which is just wonderful and not at all surprising to me, given who our speaker is. The University of Wisconsin-Madison's Our Shared Future Heritage Marker reads, "The University of Wisconsin-Madison occupies ancestral Ho-Chunk land, a place their nation has called Dejope since time immemorial. In an 1832 treaty, the Ho-Chunk were forced to cede this territory. Decades of ethnic cleansing followed when both the federal and state government repeatedly, but unsuccessfully, sought to forcibly remove the Ho-Chunk from Wisconsin. This history of colonization informs our shared future of collaboration and innovation. Today, UW-Madison respects the inherent sovereignty of the Ho-Chunk Nation, along with the 11 other First Nations of Wisconsin. Colonialism is an ongoing process. As a department, we recognize and respect the knowledge reflected in the Ho-Chunk's custodianship of Dejope and in their continuing connection to land, water, and community at UW-Madison. We recognize the violence, displacement, and settlement that shape our relations in and with this space. We must therefore, as a department committed to justice, commit ourselves to addressing the intentional erasure of Indigenous people in our policies, practices, teaching and learning, and in our relations to place and with the earth. We encourage all members of the EPS and the School of Education communities to trace, celebrate, and deepen their own connections to Dejope, and to learn about the histories and present stories of the resilient Ho-Chunk presence and relationships that shape this land. Learning about Wisconsin First Nations is an essential first step in this process, and I am putting in the chat some starting points that we recommend to anyone who would like to begin to do some work in this area. With that, and although we still have people flowing in, I am so honored to welcome Dr. Nicole Bowman today. Dr. Bowman, Lenape Mohican, is the president and founder of Bowman Performance Consulting and associate scientist at the Wisconsin Center for Educational Research and the Wisconsin Evaluation Collaborative. Dr. Bowman holds a PhD in educational leadership and policy analysis from right here at UW-Madison. Her dissertation is titled Indigenous Educational Policy Development with Tribal Governments, a Case Study. She is the co-chair of the Indigenous Peoples in Evaluation in the American Evaluation Association. Dr. Bowman describes her work as being a powerful advocate for the transformation of the field of evaluation through the deep inclusiveness of Indigenous lifeways. Her academic lodge sits at the intersection of truth, spirituality, traditional knowledge, sovereignty, governance, and evaluation. I am deeply honored and blessed to call Nicole a friend and colleague, and to have had my own work reshaped by learning from her about how the harms that current hegemonic education and evaluation models can be transformed when we reimagine the power of educational policy and evaluation to support being and right relations and supporting every person's, communities, and culture's flourishing. I'm really honored to present to all of you Dr. Bowman and thank her for joining us today. Dr. Bowman, I turn it over to you because our time is limited and I wish we had 6 hours with you.
Let's see if I can do this right. Can you see the right side of my screen?
Yes.
Kolomosi, ni Deshinzi, Wichiwinu, Kanewak, ni non GIE, Shana, Wisconsin, Mohikanewe and Lenape Kwe, Anishik, Wichitek, walk, Nialagomatit, walk, Kikes, walk, Nishok, Sienna Anshanakwe, Mama, all the aunties, Mama's sisters that are here, relatives, and to the Ho-Chunk Nation for bringing a deepening of what it means to be Indigenous, for sharing that love and in the 7 directions with us so that we could be here today. I feel I've been in ceremony for weeks for this, and I feel very blessed for all the folks that are here. And I ask that Kishalamokwe, our creator, and the ancestors that live along way up in the stars, where where their homes are, that they are helping me do my best job today. So I want to talk about, I'm going to tell a little story about good relatives, and I'm going to use our medicine wheel to the north and to the south and to the east and to the west. And I tried very hard to braid in or weave in what this series means in the history, the pre-contact, the current status, and thinking to the next 7 generations. And so that's why I give big thanks to the Ho-Chunk Nation and to all of the tribal nations that have welcomed me in, to my own nations, plural, that have helped me have cultural and academic humility as I share this today. So I want you to think about being a good relative, and that could mean auntie, uncle, brother, sister, friend. Sometimes those of us in the 12-step community have family of choice. And we're going to talk about, this is the Lenape version of the medicine wheel. It is one version. My sister Allison, who's on here, would probably have a different version, and my medicine baby, Sienna Ashanakwe, would have her own version, as I wore my jingles today for my Sienna. But this is our medicine wheel, and in the eastern door, we're going to talk about a cultural framing, both Lenape and Indigenous, and we face the east to do sunrise ceremony. And we are the original people, and that's why the door is red. The southern door, we're going to talk about what did it mean to happen post-contact. A lot of times we hear things happen so long ago, and I'm going to try to make this historical connection, you know, of the generations past, our generations, and what we can do to help the generations moving forward. In the western door, I give it a specific educational policy and systems framing, talking about the 2018 Evidence-Based Policy Act. And then in the northern door, I'm going to share examples. North is white. It's the wisdom of our ancestors. And so I encourage you to listen to whatever is coming up for you and what is resonating with you, and trust your voice, because the first lesson I was taught is everything you know is inside of you, and you have to listen and be a good relative first to yourself. And so Dean Hess says we're especially focused on equity, diversity, and inclusion work that reduces barriers to access, increases the demographic diversity of our faculty and staff and students, and encourages scholarship and service that embraces all members of our society. And so I want us to think about doing that good work. Being a good relative starts with knowing who you are. And getting to know who you are may be the shortest distance, but it could be your longest journey. And I hope that I'm an elder in training at almost 50. I hope that I can do the right things for the next 50 years of my life. Being a good relative first means, what is your self-identity? And identity is really tied up in a lot of different things. And some folks don't even realize there are Indigenous peoples even here, let alone tribes, and all of the many things besides ceremony that we do. I'm a sister. I'm the eldest sister, so that comes with certain things. I'm a wife. I'm an auntie. My best job is being an auntie. I try to bring traditional teachings into contemporary spaces, of course, with my traditional teachers around me, making sure that I'm doing the right thing. I have a professional and academic identity. And these are some of the pictures of the people I love very much all around the world, Native and non-Native, who are working on decolonization, dismantling the patriarchy with medicine in their bundles, and with PhD tools, with songs and dance, and making good friends and good fellowship and working together. So this is just a snapshot. Being a good relative reminds you you're in kinship. At my organization, BPC, we have teachers that are our littlest ones, are Sienna and Seneca, all the way up to our elders, that are in their 70s, 80s, and some older. And happy to say that we try our best to be intersectional with our LGBTQ2 spirit, with our Latino sorry, Andrea, if I'm not saying it right, with Indigenous peoples from around the world, and just being open. The medicine wheel represents the 4 colors of humankind, and we have to be respectful to all of them. That was also an early teaching that I received, because to disrespect one is to disrespect all of them. And so there's a kinship. And one of the kinships we talk about is, how do we learn from experience, and how do we learn from listening and observation, a very Western notion. This picture that you're seeing, my Lenape Metaphysical Theory of Change, took over 20 years, and I'm not sure what, but it took 20 years to get to here. And I look forward to all of the teachings that I get, but we are taught to listen to the seen and the unseen. That's why it's a metaphysical theory of change. We learn to be quiet so we can learn from birds and water and earth and air. And before contact, we used to be able to speak with all beings, all relatives. And I think that sense of being a good relative means you have humility and respect and love. There are lots of teachings that could go with this, and this could go on for 2 weeks itself, but I'll get moving. So as we sort of move out of the Eastern door, I have questions, and if you feel like putting, are we putting comments in the comment box for the questions, Michael?
Yep.
Okay.
Feel free to put your responses in the chat.
Okay. You can put responses or questions, and then we'll go through them at the end. We'll get to interact a little bit more. How do you self-identify? And think about how your identity, and if there are changes based on the context you're in. What changes, what doesn't change, and why? I try very hard, like a tree, to have deep roots. And you have to be able to sway and move, but stand your ground. Being a person of color, being mixed race is tough. Being female is tough, especially in academia, where many things are colonized and just real tough is all I can say. So I really appreciate being here today, because I'm excited to talk about policy as well. We are scientists, we are traditionalists, we're a lot of things. And so think about your identity and what you bring and how your identity may impact others. And then if you think about aspects of power, privilege, and intergenerational knowledge transmission or omission, and we're going to learn about this in the other doors. How does your identity, or how do your cognitive constructs influence the policy research, teaching, or evaluation work that you're doing? And I think it's very important. And you heard the Dean talk about we have to get at our hard truths. And so Chancellor Blank said, no plaque or monument can ever adequately convey a difficult and complicated history, but it can start a conversation that moves us from ignorance to awareness. So today is the beginning of an intentional effort to teach our shared history. And if you notice, we don't really have things on a continuum. We have things in circles a lot. And so we're moving into the southern door, and we're going to talk a little bit about general policy and how general policy has worked or not worked for us. And so if you think about colonization, and hopefully everybody can see this, and I have a PDF of the PowerPoint that Nancy in her office will share or post. We talk about political colonialism. This type explores and exploits raw materials and wealth from colonies for the purpose of processing it to manufactured wealth or goods. It could be taking the land, it could be harming the natural resources. It could be a lot of different things, using one group against another group. Colonial power.
Nicole, I'm sorry, we just lost you after the discussion of political colonialism, after that first point. So if you can go back, that would be great.
Oh, okay, sorry. Right of access and claim to the land, to people, to anything belonging to us. Even if it's our knowledge, you know how many people ask us to do stuff for nothing? That's not a reciprocal relationship. And then you think, where's the power and control? It's outside of the colony itself. So when you're doing policy research evaluation studies, are you leading or co-leading with Indigenous people or people of color or LGBTQ two-spirit or those of us who are underrepresented? That moves us sort of into the scientific colonialism. when you're getting data from the community to process it into books, articles, wealth, new grants, a lot of times folks, will learn something from my community and then they'll want to go and run with it. Most of my publications, the publishers don't get 100% worldwide exclusive rights. It's not mine to give away. It belongs to the community, and that's a very different concept. There's a reason that my traditional teacher and my elder is on here, because she sees everything I do and she keeps me in line. There is transparency. As scientists, we believe we have unlimited right to access to any data source or population. And I would include myself in that. Just because we're Native, we try not to roll in and act like, oh yeah, they'll participate in the study because we're Native. We have to remember that we are in relation. Remember, in relation means balance. We're one piece of a much bigger ecosystem. And then the center of knowledge and information about a people or community is located outside of them. Do you know how many non-natives write about us? One only has to look in books. There are very, very, very many Native scholars who are also traditional people. And hopefully by the end of this presentation, you will know a few of them. If you're a serious scholar and you're serious about decolonizing the academy and the work you do, you have to read Stephen Newcomb's Pagans in the Promised Land. There's a short version that I think should be shown in every class. It's produced by 38+2 Productions. But Stephen Newcomb talks about this is a 2008 book. He attacks federal Indian law and policy in the presumption that American Indian nations are subject to the plenary power of the United States. Now, thinking to yourself as—
Nicole, I'm sorry, we lost you again. Just briefly after your first kind of brief description of the book.
I'm on high-speed internet in rural America, but okay, I'm really sorry.
Oh, sorry.
All right.
Worst case scenarios is that you turn off your camera, but I don't know if we want to resort to that, but I know that will.
Oh, why don't I do that? That'll help. Let's do that. Okay. I apologize for that. So Newcomb talks about colonization being a common experience of indigenous peoples worldwide that has resulted and continues to result in our loss of land, language, cultural knowledge, health, life, natural resources, and an economic base. It's important to share this origin story about colonization. Can you still hear me?
Yep.
Oh,
We can.
Yep.
Oh, I saw Michael's lips moving. I'm like, whoa. It's important that we know this origin story because the audience, the non-native audience, needs to understand how colonization began and continues to run through our institutions, our policies and systems that many of us are employed by or impacted today. We talk about the cognitive, I want to talk just a minute about cognitive theory and idealized cognitive models. Newcomb talks about the colonizer model, but basically the doctrine of discovery, if you go back to 1493 and the Papal Bulls, it basically, it was a divine, if you read them, it was by a divine voice that came down to Spain's strategy, that's where Christopher Columbus came from, and said there is this new world and there is nothing over in the new world that if they're not Christian, they're not considered human, they're considered heathens. And so it is by that discovery, by that divine intervention, so to speak, that the colonization of America and Australia and New Zealand and fill in the blank happened. And the reason this is important is because when Christianity, which I'm not taking, I want us to think about Christendom instead of Christianity. So Christendom is when there is an alliance among church stations, nation states, including the secular princes or priestly authorities that sort of all get together and decide, yeah, this is a good strategy, this is a good policy that we're going to use, because it is by that origin story 528 years ago that still affects us today. Because if you look at some of our earliest cases in the United States Supreme Court. The reasons for, even before we had a colonial government or a US Constitution, the rationale that was used to kill us, to kill our babies and to conquer the land was based in this divine right. And so if you look in the Supreme Court case, it's called the Marshall Trilogy, but the first one was the 1823 case, Johnson versus McIntosh. Chief Justice John Marshall's opinion in the unanimous decision that held the principle of discovery gave European nations an absolute right to the new lands. That meant, in essence, American Indians only had a right to occupancy, which could be abolished. And so as you go through time, these things about it happening so long ago aren't really true, because there are hundreds, over 200 cases that constantly go back and cite the Marshall Trilogy, for which land disputes happen, and it's the reason why we're not seen on committees. It's the reason why 574 tribal nations are not given access and voice in congressional matters, even though they have equal status to the US government and other international governments, nation states they would be called. And so I'm going to flip to the next screen here, and I'm assuming everybody's still hearing me. Yes, okay. So one of the land grab, and remember the presenter, the last presenter we had talked about land grab universities, of which University of Wisconsin-Madison is one. So if you type in land grab universities, you'll learn a little bit more about all the universities who are, if you're in North America, you're on sacred ground, colonized land. And so there are lots of benefits from the way things were done illegally, immorally, unethically, 500, 300 years ago, that we're all still reaping benefits today if you're on the right side of the decision, I guess. And so I'm speaking for those who are suffering and who are not on the right side of that decision and the many, many decisions thereafter. Every tribe has a trail of tears. So like Ho-Chunk Nation, every nation has a story. And this is the one for the Mohican and Lenape community. And we are on the northeastern area of Turtle Island, known as North America now. And there are many, as you can see from the post-colonial contact maps on the right-hand side, that show you where we live. And I think about it as the Nina Pinta and Santa Maria crashing sort of into the side of the Turtle Island, and we just were scattered, and it took hundreds of years, but this is where we are now, and we're still here, and we're still surviving, and we're using our language and our ceremonies along with the many tools that UW-Madison gave me as a PhD graduate of ALPA to help make sure that our voices are heard and that our visibility is seen. As we go to the next slide, we see that I'm going to give 3 examples of how evidence-based policy making generally is working for us or not working. I would like to just let everybody know in a transparent way, I don't believe it's evidence-based policy making is objective. I think it's a political, non-objective activity of the colonizer, and it has been for a long time. And if any of you disagree, look at the longitudinal data. If what was working for evidence-based worked, we still wouldn't have the same basically health, education, economic, fill in the blank outcomes for Indigenous populations or BIPOC populations that we've literally had for hundreds of years. So to me, the evidence-based policy making movement has been especially harmful. And I'm going to give a few of many examples. We're overrepresented in these poor outcomes. We have the highest disparities per capita. We have the lowest visibility in academic studies or leading things. And we are the fewest PhDs in academia. And this has held true over the years. If any of you haven't seen Dawnland, this is something that the School of Ed could greatly benefit by. It's an Emmy award-winning documentary. There are materials that go with it, learning materials. There are activities to go through. Mishi Lesher and Adam Monzo are the folks involved with this. We helped evaluate this program, but this is about forced removal and child welfare. The first official Truth and Reconciliation Commission began in the United States at the state level. And the Dawnland goes behind the scenes to show and chart how we were forcibly removed, and not just in Maine, but all over North America. And I'm sure in New Zealand and Australia as well, we were removed from our families. I'm working on a current project with child welfare. Not much has changed. The policies of the state and counties incentivize taking Native kids away from their families. If there's a budget deficit, you know, you get paid. You get paid, and you can take away Native kids and get paid, and drag your feet to get them reunified. And it's a really terrible, it's just terrible, and it's been going on for 50 or 60 years that we know of. We know it has gone on before that. We know that it's happening on the borders, and we heard about it under the last administration, where our families are being separated. And it's rough when the news cycle says, wow, has, like, basically this hasn't happened. So it's like trauma upon trauma. We talk about data and missing murdered Indigenous women and Two-Spirit. And this is something that is going on worldwide. I'm wearing my Missing Murdered Indigenous Women sacred beadwork that I received from my Tessa to speak for those who cannot speak. In Wisconsin, we have a Missing Murdered Indigenous Women Task Force. In Minnesota, Arizona, Washington, and this is from Dr. Abby Echohawk of the Urban Indian Health Institute. But we are struggling because there are multi-jurisdictional injustices. So if one of our girls goes missing or one of our women goes missing, it's really hard to work with non-Indigenous law enforcement. They don't understand how the tribal government works. They don't understand sovereignty. They certainly don't understand the cultural protocols. And it's the same way when non-Indigenous researchers or policymakers or evaluators go into community and they don't know how to act right, I guess is what we are acting risky, but because of poverty and homelessness.
Nicole, there was another, you froze up again.
Okay, I'm gonna leave my camera off. I'm sorry.
That's no problem.
Thank you for trying again. Darn it.
I tried. Okay, so I'm gonna move to the next slide, and I'm really sorry. It's just jarring when I can't use my internet, my camera. So if you think about COVID-19, Dr. Carolee Dodge Francis of UW School of Human Ecology just got done with a big study on this, but we talk about how colonization colonization's impacts are compounded through COVID-19 because of all the other social determinants of health and all the other ways that we are already behind, or that there are gaps, or that we have insufficient support. And you can see this around the world with all Indigenous populations. When we have to call in Doctors Without Borders from an international to get international help because we can't get it in the United States, this is a problem. Navajo Nation and many of our tribal nations and people, the communities have 4 times the rate of COVID-19. There's a lot of data erasures. There have been data breaches regarding the CARES Act because there hasn't been tribal nation representation or sovereignty honored from a legal political standpoint. And there's concern for Indigenous data sovereignty. You're going to hear more of that. Who governs and who owns and who has access to the data? There are a lot of problems because we're not leading the studies. Evidence-based policymaking and data terrorism. This is something new from Dr. Carroll and her counterparts down at the University of Arizona. They work a lot on Indigenous Data Sovereignty Network and on these different topics. Abigail Echohawk is one of the leading voices in this area. But data terrorism is defined as the use of data to terrorize a population into submission for political, ideological, or social gain. It comprises 2 categories: data for terrorism and data as terrorism. Indigenous communities and tribal nations have experienced both during the pandemic. And some of us would argue before the pandemic, we hopefully not after the pandemic. And so as we move out of the southern door, general policies, I want you to think about and put in the chat box, what did your formal education teach you about us? Pre-contact or our contemporary realities? What do you know now about that? What do you teach yourself? You know, not all of us live in teepees still, okay? Many of us have, you know, jobs. Many of us live in homes. It's might sound like I'm being sarcastic, but we did this on a daily basis. People are just, we're either romanticized or we're completely not known about, or if you are one of the natives who has a good life, then you must be an anomaly somehow. And so just think about how our K-12 and our higher ed systems, and that would include professional development and professional associations, and who you see and what you read or what you don't see, really perpetuates the historical to contemporary impacts of colonization. As we move to the western door, this whole door is going to be about the educational policy and using a systems framework. And so if you look at the different eras for education, and this would be basically public education policy that tribal nations and Native families and students have dealt with over the years. And that's why I say reeling and reeling, like keeping it real through the years. We had a pre-colonial era where we learned from Mother Earth and our ancestors and our relatives and non-humans that we learned outside. We learned how to survive. We were doing great. We didn't, my Lenape community would eat shellfish during certain times of year that were at the bottom of the shore, of the ocean shore, and we could eat food on the grasslands and pick berries, and we could go all the way up to the mountaintops, and we knew how to take care from the tops of mountains down to the bottom of the ocean without harming Mother Earth or the animals or the plants. We didn't take more than we needed, and we were respectful. We were a good relative. And so that's where education came from, pre-colonial era. Then we move into the early colonial era. You can see early US era, assimilation. We're going to talk about these things a little bit. Down determination and relocation. So you're no longer an Indian tribe. That happened in Menominee Indian tribe by us. Anyone who was part of Public Law 280 said, okay, you're no longer a tribe anymore. We could do a whole presentation on termination and relocation, but there's a lot of sorrow in that because we are not on the land, and the land is our relative, and that's where we learn about our culture and our language and how to live in harmony with other beings. And so we feel lost, and wherever we walk on Turtle Island is a massacre site. It's particularly hard when we go back to, you know, by the Hudson River and we go to New York, New Jersey area, because there have been some really awful things that have happened there, as well as all the way throughout time that got us to the different places that we are today. Indian Ed and self-determination era, we're going to talk about that and what that meant from 64 to 2015. And then the self-actualization era. Is that the era we're in right now? I certainly hope so. And I'd like to thank Dr. Marty Reinhardt. We work on a lot of things together, and this is one of them. This is some of the relationship between Indian education legislation. We have tribal rights. We do things through oral history, treaty rights. We have tribal constitution, tribal laws. We have MOUs sometimes with universities or schools. And if you look on the left side, you can see the Snyder Act starting in 1921 all the way through 2018, the Evidence-Based Policy Act. You see ESSA in there. And I'm just going to keep going because I know we're keeping an eye on time. This model becomes very important. Tribal governments, 574 in the United States, have equal status to the federal government. We have treaty rights and we have legal and political rights. That's also recognized by the United Nations and by many nations under the United Nations Declaration for the rights of Indigenous people. We see a framework there that can be used. And then the state is sort of a subsidiary of the federal government. But where these parts overlap, you see in the middle is called a trilateral or a multi-jurisdictional model. So if funding comes in for federal programs, it sometimes flows through the feds right to the tribes. Sometimes it flows from the feds to the state to the tribes, sort of depending on what it is. And it's pretty, the complexity, systems theory, and subsystems that you have to use to sort of untangle this are really an interesting part of my work. And so as we move on here, I just tried to give a little bit more detail, a little bit more description of what this means. So where the tribes and the federal government overlap, you can see US Constitution has ed policies, Indian clauses, BIA schools, Office of Indian Education, tribal ed departments, and so on. We know where tribal and state overlap. We see a lot of work, and I think it was Dr. J.P. Leary who talked about Act 31. That would be something that would sit where the tribe and the state overlap, and so on. I want to talk about the Evidence-Based Policy Act because that's what we're here for, and that's the current legislation we're dealing with. Paul Ryan, Republican, Wisconsin, introduced it in 2017. It got signed into law into 2019. And it was bipartisan, and it sets the stage for government-wide reforms at the federal level for making data accessible and useful for decision-making. It incorporates recommendations from the U.S. Commission on Evidence-Based Policymaking. No tribes, tribal nations, or tribal scholars were on that. It addresses priorities from the open data community and adopts widely accepted strategies for securely analyzing existing data. I take issue with that, but it's coming. It emphasizes collaboration and coordination to advance data and evidence building functions in the federal government by statutorily mandating federal evidence building activities, open government data, confidential protection, and statistical efficiency. And so as we move through here, and you can see these are the different parts. This timeline shows that it's going to have to be carried out in phases. And so this iterative and coordinated implementation of the Evidence Act is going to require ongoing effort, says the OMB. We have to work on activities already underway, and in some cases require coordination of activities in new ways. And so how OMB is asking us to align related data and information policy guidance. They are asking us to have learning agendas and the proper personnel and planning activities. That's what phase 1 is about. And then phase 2 is about open access and data management. Phase 3 is about data access for statistical purposes. And phase 4 is about program evaluation. And so right now we're currently in phase 1. And this slide shows key implementation activities that we are supposed to be getting done during phase 1. It includes developing learning agendas, designating and developing roles and responsibilities for personnel like chief information officers, and it basically is the driving force. The learning agendas are the driving force for this act. There are new designated positions: an evaluation officer, chief data officer, and statistical official that all play a role. States have, just like the No Child Left Behind, the ESSA plans, states have to put in evidence-based plans. And the components of evidence are listed here. It's broad, and it includes foundational fact-finding, performance measurement, policy analysis, and program evaluation. The Evidence Act mandates a systemic rethinking of government data management to better facilitate access for evidence-building activities and public consumption. A systemic effort, if you are not colonizing the education system, would include the 11 tribes in Wisconsin. It doesn't. It would include the 574 tribes in the United States and over 1,200 First Nations governments in North America. And so when we talk about evidence and what counts and whose voice, it becomes very interesting scientific, political, and advocacy activity that I'm still trying to wrap my brain around. OMB recognizes there's not one way to develop a learning agenda, and so this is what they are asking us to do to have, fair and open discussions about different stakeholders and talking about what evidence is and how to implement this act. And so per the Evidence Act, it says agencies shall consult with the public, state, and local governments and representatives of non-government researchers. They also urge broader consultation with additional stakeholders. Not anywhere in here does it say tribal governments. And so anyone want to take a guess who this is? If you guess the Federal Advisory Committee on Data for Evidence Building, you are right. So there is a Federal Advisory Committee. I don't know if any of these people are from UW-Madison, but if they are, somebody let me know. I want to visit with them. Why? Because there are no nations or scholars on this evidence-based committee. For the American Evaluation Association, Nick Hart, the upper left corner, is the person that is the gatekeeper for the Evidence-Based Policy Act and anything evidence-based that runs through the American Evaluation Association. AEA is similar to AERA, except it's for evaluators. This is a picture of from 1778 to 2020. And I have this as a handout too, if you need it. But if you look, in 1778 was the first federal funding for Indian schools, and I go all the way through to 2020. And so that's what, roughly 250 years, 240 years, something like that. This Evidence-Based Policy Act isn't the first federal policy that has brought us harm. So I'm going to ask us to do something different. My dissertation in ELPA was the first policy study that looked at tribal and federal and state government. And one of the strands in my literature review was looking at the Merriam report. If you look at the Merriam report from 1923, the findings and the things that Native learners need is almost the same as what you see today in the most recent studies, including the National Indian Education Study. And so as we move out of the western door, and we're going to be on the northern door soon, what ways do you engage with tribal nations, urban or rural, that are off reservation? Because over 90% of our Native students go to public schools. How do you include Indigenous scholars through your work? Are they co-PIs with you? Are they co-authors with you? Are you funding them? This is the relationship you have, if you're a good relative, informal and intermittent, or is this an authentic and sustained partnership, a relationship, good relative? In what ways are you supporting a systemic nation-to-nation effort in the spirit of building capacity, having good resources for reciprocal relationship, and being a good relative? And I would say speaking out on the institutional and systemic racism and patriarchy that many of us are dealing with. Chancellor Blank said the plaque is a beginning, not an end, and I thought that was a good quote, because everything the power does, it does in a circle. We're about circles. And so I tried to put together for research and development, it could be curriculum development, professional development, policy development. There's a level of implementation and there's a level of evaluation. These are how they relate to one another. And so as we move forward to try to build a shared future, let's be active and let's be thoughtful. And when I talk about using wisdom, if we had wisdom, we wouldn't still be working or having the same problems. That's what wisdom is, because anything good or bad is our teacher, is what our elders tell us. And so let's start using wisdom instead of just generating more knowledge or the latest fad or craze or framework. What we're doing, we have a responsibility to help those most in need of help. That is the Wisconsin idea. That is, what we are here for in a public institution. And so as you think about Northern Door, I just want to go through these slides and share, this is being done. It may not be on your radar, but at least a few of them will be on your radar today. How do we work nation to nation? This is my model. This is what I used for my 2015 multi-jurisdictional study. And so the circles are the Native nation and government is the red circle, the public or international government or agency. So that could be UW-Madison, that could be DPI, that could be an LEA. And then the left yellow circle is UNDRIP, the rights that we have, and how do we have that be our guidance. There is an American version of the Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People, but this is a framework that we could use. And I pull out the tribal part because when I go to work in community, I talk to not just the elected officials, but I listen to the traditional knowledge keepers. What are the protocols? What are the strengths? What are the responsibilities? In the South, I look at, are there treaty rights? What's oral history? Are there traditional agreements? I look in the West, what's the tribal constitution, ordinances and policies? And then in the North, I look to the community and the families. What's going on there in that context of practice, or those contexts plural of practice? And so this is just a quick application. I looked at federal policies, state and tribal government policies. In our state, we have 11 tribal ed departments. And on the left side for LEAs, we have 426, or at least we did in 2015. I don't know if we have any more. And then where Stockbridge Muncie students go to school are at Bowler, Gresham, and Shawano. And that's sort of the big picture of the framing of my study. If you want to read it, it's online on the Native American Rights Fund website. I'd like to give a shout out to Dr. Bruce King, Dr. Carolee Dodge Francis, and Dr. Patty Lowe. They were on my committee. And I wasn't, I had parted ways with my original advisor. And any of you who have been on the reservation know there's res dogs that are running around. And I'm trying to be funny here. You can't see my face. But he picked, I remember saying to him, thanks for picking up an old res dog like me. I promise I'll do good. And in 10 months, we wrote almost 400 pages together. We had to redo the whole thing. And it was the first study in the United States that used tribal government and federal and state government a policy study. And we got a call from the White House, so I was really happy about that. And as you can see, I gifted folks. Tribal critical theory needs to be part of the work. Carl Sack is a non-native from UW-Madison, and in 2017, when North Dakota Pipeline was going through, he said, let's use critical cartography and make a map. The map on the left are the colonizers who are hurting people, hurting the land, hurting the water, and trying to get this pipeline pushed through the map. And they say, look, we're not on Standing Rock Sioux land. The map on the right it uses treaty laws and treaty maps. And of course, it's a black snake. And of course, you are not living up to your treaty rights or the legal and political rights. And we continue to follow that. And I am not an expert on here, but there may be some. So forgive me for any of the Dakota relatives or folks who have worked on this project. I am not even giving it any just due that it certainly deserves. When you are doing studies, this is a study we have with NORC, and I'm the co-PI. I'm the second person in charge. And Jennifer Hamilton, who is also, we call ourselves blue collar scholars. She's one of the vice presidents at NORC, or the vice president, but she asked me to be co-PI because this study had to be done the right way. And she funded us at what we asked. And we are sisters in this study to make sure that our BIE kids are getting the best of what they need. And so when I first saw my name as co-principal investigator on the top right there, it literally brought me to tears, because if I can be there and if Jennifer sees that I can be there, others will. And so that's what I'm hoping my non-native allies will do with the current scholars and the upcoming warrior scholars that are coming through undergraduate and graduate school right now. Marty Reinhardt and I worked on, through the American Institute for Research, Midwest Comp Center, and the DPI, to this American Indian Education in Wisconsin is a free resource to put together tribal consultation agreements and workbooks that talk about this trilateral model. We've done studies with Department of Health Services, La Follette, SOHI, and DHS on how do we do better outreach? How do we have better instruments? How do we do a needs assessment? How do we set up the design for a study when you have to talk to women who've had 1 to 7 babies and all of them have been addicted in utero? We have to do our work differently. Shout out to my WCER peeps. We are doing the same kind of work. You see Hazel Simonette, Annalie Good is my boss. She hates it when I say that, but we are making changes here. And I hope you see these beautiful, multicultural, multi-generational pictures as ways to move forward together. Indigenous arts and sciences, same thing. That Cheryl Bauer Armstrong and her shop. We have a Spencer grant right now that talks about nation-to-nation model and how to use it in science. The Earth Partnerships website has different materials posted there for you to look at. Systems thinking. The children drew Lake Gitchigami there, right, in the middle, and we told traditional stories. And when we had to do wraparound care and a system of support for community members, we not only use culture and language, we use art and we use song and we use traditional teachings to put together a system evaluation across all of these areas. When we talked to the ed department, we asked the linguist, how do you say education, and how was traditionally was education done before it got colonized? You know, we all were learning together, and that's what we mean about being a good relative. You're in the lodge and you're learning together. We have many organizations we work with for academic lodges is what I call them, not sacred ones, but they're online talking circles and community of practice. And I would encourage School of Ed to think about this as well. We have one right now with the Population Health Institute. And Dr. Sherry Johnson, you're more than welcome to sit in on any of those. And that's through the UW side of Nikki. But we help build non-native capacity. We help folks get comfortable with how we interact with tribal communities. And we do that through direct demonstration and not just books. How do we evaluate when we go in? What is strong in the Eastern Door? How do we affirm lived experience, not just what's published? When there are challenges, how are those our teachers? And what are we doing to address gaps? And then when you have wisdom, you document what's working and you start the circle again. This is my eval model. Nan Wepahania, sorry Nan if you're on and I didn't say it right. This is how we do nation to nation. Western imposed and causing harm is on the bottom left side. The healthy and healing side is on the upper right side. Are you invited in? Are you allowing and supporting and stepping back so Indigenous self-determination and leadership can happen? This is a real model. And then I always like to say, there's a 12-step program, to colonization. Admit that Western theories and colonial frameworks are not a neutral position. Come to believe that a power other than colonization could restore sanity and bring harmony. Making decision to turn your life over from the fragile and ego-driven individualism to the human collective driven by humility and reciprocity. Make a searching and fearless professional, ethical, cultural, and moral inventory of yourselves as scientists. Admit to the powerful and privileged, as well as the underrepresented and traumatized, the exact natures of colonizer wrongs or the wrongs that have institutionally and systemically continued as a result of the power and privilege that you have. And that's 1 through 5. Part 2 of this webinar, you'll get the rest of them. So as we reflect and resonate and go out the northern door here, how do we move from doing no harm to becoming good relatives? And then I'm trying to intentionally ask with the other points at the individual level, what's something you can start in the next 3 months? As a program and department, what operational capacity can you start working on and carrying out in the next 6 months? As an organization or School of Ed at that level, what are policy and resource investment strategies you can use to commit to in the next 12 months? And as a system, how are you going to start dismantling power and privilege through your leadership, policy, procurements, budgets, and evidence-based practices at work instead of imposing the will? And so as you see these key takeaways, we remember if each one of us, if you're a researcher, you're one hair in this braided strand, right? Or policy or program or evaluator. As we come together and we braid this, we can become stronger with every way that we start collaborating, working together. No act is too small, so keep rocking what you're doing. And try to get wisdom where you can get wisdom. And remember, growing is uncomfortable. You know, lobster shells pop off their shells so they can grow a new one. And that every experience is our teacher. It's about balance. We're in an ecosystem of care. We have to be caring and loving to one another. We have to remember our roots are touching and being relatives as much as we need to remember we're in a forest and in an ecosystem, and it's not just about us. In our next publication, right? It has to be more community-based and more intersectional and more regenerative. And so as Kike, that means leader, President Wilford from the Ho-Chunk Nation said, a plaque is a gesture, but it's really just a support for the actions that need to happen. The past cannot be changed, so the important part is how we continue our relationship in the future. And with that, that's how you get a hold of me. And again, we'll have the PowerPoint. And you can just type in Nicole Bowman Farrell if you're at UW. That's where I am.